So meanwhile, South Africa's unemployment rate has, of course, risen to 33.2% in the second quarter. That's from 32.9% in the first. Now, some analysts warn that the impact of U.S. tariffs could be felt in the future. But for more on the worsening job numbers, we are joined by COSATU's Matthew Parks, Statistics South Africa's Social Statistics Chief Director, Solly Molai, as well as University of Johannesburg economist, Professor Donnie Meyer. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. The sad thing is when we look at our jobs numbers, it's not very often that you find too much optimism that we're going to see those numbers changing. Earlier on in the week, those numbers coming out. But I think an opportunity now for us to really break them down, look at the trends that we're seeing in how we're able to provide jobs, but particularly the quality of jobs that we're creating and how that impacts on the data. So I think, Mr. Molai, I'll let you go first. In the days that have passed, some analysis, I imagine, within Stats to say about the various factors at play. I think about the sectors that were hardest hit, agriculture, for instance, bleeding jobs. You've also got manufacturing that has bled jobs. And maybe let's go down that list and the various factors that you think are impacting those particular sectors from Stats SA's point of view, and the data that you're able to look at also in terms of the quality of jobs that we're creating in those particular sectors, Mr. Molai.
Good evening, and good evening to the panelists. Thank you so much, Annalise. So if you look at unemployment in South Africa, let's start with the sectors. The unemployment in South Africa is driven by formal sector employment. So formal sector over time has been contributing between 10 million to about 12 million now jobs. Informal sector is contributing between 2.7, if you compare the 10-year period, 2.7 million to about now 3.3 million. So informal sector is driving employment in South Africa, and we've seen over time. If you go to the industries, as you've mentioned, we are noticing that employment increased in trade, private household and construction and mining. Then the other sectors like your community social services, we are seeing a decrease in terms of 42,000 jobs losses, agriculture, finance and transport. And just to zoom into community and social services, what we have picked up in this quarter is that we are seeing now the impact of the funding that come from US, as you know, that is stopped around February or so. So the NGOs and the companies that are within the community and social services that now we are picking up the numbers, the job loss numbers for them. And I think over time, we'll also see how it's going to pan out. We are also seeing from government side, also your EPWP jobs, also we are seeing a loss there in terms of the job numbers. So overall, we are seeing a industries, only about 4 of them that sees a positive. But again, you also need to remember, Annalady, that quarter one of GDP numbers, our numbers are also showing that our GDP numbers just grown by 0.1, which also shows that the economy is not growing at the rate that we need to grow to absorb many of South Africans into the jobs.
You know, Prof. Meyer, I want to bring you in here because just as we look at the numbers that we've gotten from Stats SA, Mr. Molai talking about the sensitivities in some of these sectors, and I want to look at those that have bled jobs, right? Finance, transport, utilities, manufacturing, and then he mentions community and social services as well. If we look at community and social services, a lot of that work, quite often, short-term work, right? Not necessarily the kind of jobs that we can find that are able to give employees a lot of stability. So can we talk about just the quality of jobs that are being provided in these sectors? And if on a quarter-to-quarter basis, we're able to see the quality of those jobs actually having a big impact on the numbers when they come back from Stats SA.
Yes, good evening. I think the South African job market is in a very difficult situation. If we compare with the international global job market, the US, Europe, there's huge job shortages. People from all over the place go there and they'll be able to get jobs. In South Africa, if you've got a very high skill, a well-skilled person will get a job, but lowly skilled people, which is the majority of the people, will not get a job or a formal job. So we've got this problem that we cannot create the quality type of jobs in South Africa because of the lack of growth, lack of investment. And that is why, and also because of our labor regulations, companies are very scared to appoint people in formal positions. Most jobs that's now filled is more on a temporary basis. So we've got these unstable job market, and we also got this brain drain that's happening because of the global shortage of jobs. So our top skilled people can easily leave and get jobs overseas. Doesn't matter if it's white, black, or whatever. People with highly developed skills are in demand on a global scale, and South Africa hasn't got the skills anymore. For example, if you are a highly skilled technician in the motor industry, for example, a diesel mechanic, we've got a huge shortage of, I think there was numbers like 3,000, a need for about 3,000 highly skilled diesel mechanics in South Africa. We don't have the skills anymore. People leave, they get huge jobs overseas, and it's very easy to move. So we are in a problem that we don't have the highly skilled people, but we've got this large number of lowly skilled people. We don't provide them with enough the correct skills to get jobs in South Africa, and our job market is in a decline, and there's a number of causes which we can discuss later, but that is for me the current situation where we stand. We lag behind in the global job market.
Yeah, I immediately start to think about how that may very well widen the skills gap when you've got highly skilled individuals having a bevy of opportunities even outside of the country, and low-skilled workers, really scrambling for the bits and pieces of opportunities that are available to them. I don't know what you make of that, Matthew, and if COSATU's really looked at this, the vulnerability, particularly for low-skilled workers in the country.
No, it's extremely worrying, Naledi. We've seen, previous industrial revolutions, many jobs being lost. And we're going through a new industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution. We've seen it really galloping since COVID. The fact that we're meeting here virtually, we're not sitting in a studio doing makeup, etc. There's deep structural shifts. And many workers, not just blue-collar workers or low-skilled workers, even white-collar workers, jobs are at risk. And if we're not proactive, if we don't take the initiative to address the skills shortage that Professor Mayer speaks to smartly use the funds available to us, because we have funds, the CETAs, the National Skills Fund, etc., to really equip workers, not just for the jobs of today, but also for the jobs of tomorrow, to overhaul our school curriculum system, to make sure when people leave the schools, they have the practical skills. So have a driver's license, have some other skills, make sure that kids, when they leave school, well, number one, they don't leave school before 18, but when they leave, they should matriculate. They should either go to a TVET college or another college, or go to a university or university of technology. But we need to be constantly investing in the skills of people, because people are going to be at risk. And if you look at the major trend of this last jobs report right now, there's about 19,000 cumulative jobs created, but we had 140,000 new entrants to the market, which shows we're not creating the jobs to absorb young people. We have an expanded unemployment rate of about 42.9%. The job creation or recovery we saw post-COVID has plateaued. We've seen it beginning to inch up, and that is a ticking time bomb. And we need to be really smart. We need to treat this as a national crisis, as a threat to the nation, and do the basics, ensuring we have affordable electricity, ensuring that our transit is running at full productivity, so that mining, manufacturing, agricultural jobs can be created and saved, ensuring metro rail is operational so we boost the urban economy. But even more difficult things than that, Naledi, are things like fixing municipalities so that SMEs, factories can work. But also we need to be more creative than that, because we've been on this journey for the past 30 years. We failed to deal with unemployment decisively. We need to be saying, what can we do to really mobilize a bold, progressive, industrial, SME, export incentives program, mobilizing funds in the public sector, yes, but also the private sector, the banks, investment funds, and so forth, because we've got to do this just like we dealt with COVID-19. We can't continue to normalize an abnormal scenario where 4 out of 10 South Africans, 7 out of 10 young people can't find work, because that is a ticking time bomb, and in one day it is going to explode in our faces.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Molai, if we can go into some of the points that have been made by Prof. Meyer as well as Mr. Parks. I mean, we know that obviously the youngest of groupings, really the most vulnerable. So the jobless rate for 15 to 24, sitting at 62.2% for the second quarter. That's a substantial percentage there. But other vulnerable groupings and what you make of this high skill versus low skill, predicament that we find ourselves in, where you've got the most lowest skilled, most desperate to find work, and perhaps some trends that you're seeing there.
Yes, thank you so much, Naledi. So, if you look at unemployment in South Africa, firstly, it's young people, as you already alluded to, about 15 to 34 years. The unemployment rate is sitting about 46%, which is quite higher than the national unemployment rate. The second part that I also want to contribute to tonight is that because we are celebrating Women's Month, we are also noticing that from our numbers that women are also vulnerable to unemployment, and especially Black African women. If you look at the unemployment rate, is quite high compared to the national average. So we are sitting with a picture that says that unemployment is having a face of a young person and a Black woman, and especially in provinces like Northwest, Limpopo, and then even within the Western Cape and Gauteng, we've seen that unemployment rate also has increased. The third point I also want to raise, Naledi, is that if you look at the graduates, which normally their unemployment rate was below the 10%, we are now sitting about 12.2% of graduates, which means that unemployment rate among the graduates is actually increasing. And this is something that we have noticed and we've picked up in the previous 2 quarters, and now we notice again in this quarter. So the economy is not growing at the rate that is going to absorb, or it's absorbing the graduates. And again, we are seeing that even with those who've got a qualification now, they are not able to get a job. And going back to the point that I was raising about the community and social activities, we have noticed that if you look at the people who are employed in those industries, majority are women. And we have not, as I've already said, that that particular industry have shared a lot of jobs, which means that we are most likely to see unemployment rate for women, especially particular Black women, increasing, especially in the subsequent quarters.
Sure. That's not very encouraging to hear. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Prof. Meyer did talk about us really starting to get to the bottom of the causes of why we're seeing such a massive skills gap and why we're losing some of our more highly skilled workers or employees in the country. But then we're also seeing the convention taking place towards the national dialogue. One of the big talking points is going to be how we create an environment for people to be able to find work. The recommendations that we hear from our panel of that on the other side of this. Stay with us. Welcome back. So one of the big stories certainly of the week has been the increase in unemployment numbers in the country. And we speak to our panelists this morning around some of the opportunities that we have to turn things around, and particularly when we look at the quality of jobs that we are creating in the country and for the most vulnerable. But I do want to come to this, Prof. Meyer. You talked about the causes of why we're seeing that mismatch, a growing number of low-skilled workers in South Africa, and then a shrinking number of high-skilled workers that we seem to be bleeding in the country as well. You wanted to touch on the causes and perhaps some recommendations.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to say that jobs is basically the cornerstone of any economy, and also in South Africa. It gives people dignity to have a decent job. And I think we haven't been able to create that. And also, we need to turn the ship. Government has had now 30 years with implementing the same policies without much success. We have seen our unemployment rate growing and growing, and no real huge level of formal jobs are created. I think over the last 15 years, maybe the most of the job opportunities were in government. And it's not government's role to create jobs. We've got a very huge government with a huge government wage bill, and that is affecting our budget, for example. So there's a lot of, there's other political commentators, economic commentators that are saying we can even cut the government in half and we'll still have the same type of service delivery. So that is one of our main problems. And another issue is that we must, if you look at the economy, consumption, investment, government spending, and exports and imports, our consumer market is nearly only a third of what it should be if you have got more than 30% unemployment. We haven't got investment because of policy uncertainty. Policy uncertainty, the latest example is where the governor of the Reserve Bank says now we've got a 3% inflation target, while the Treasury say no, we haven't got it. It's a 3 to 6% target. What will happen if inflation goes up now? Will interest rate goes up again? So it doesn't make sense, the statements that's been made. The GNU, they talk from different point of views. There's no agreement on a national goal that everybody can work towards. If you look back at the Asian tigers, they had one vision, one goal, economic development. Everybody worked together. And if we don't turn the ship and have a vision for everybody that can buy in, we will not be successful. But I think there's a lot of reasons why we've got this problem, and most of it points to governance. Governance in terms of our policy uncertainty, corruption, even government staff that's doing business with government still going on, and we know about it, but nothing is done. There's a lot of red tape procedures that's stopping business to happen. And South Africa has got the most difficult small business environment in the world. We've done work on that research, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor process. South Africa has got the most difficult small business environment, and government must provide a good environment for small business to be successful and for entrepreneurs to create jobs. That is where the jobs will come from if small business can be successful and grow. To establish and to grow a business is extremely difficult in South Africa because of regulations, because of crime, because of electricity issues and other service delivery issues that we have on a daily basis. A lot of these problems, if I can end up with this, relates to poor governance. And we need to turn the ship around and make sure that we provide the service to the people of South Africa that is so desperately needed. And at the end of it, we will have economic growth, which drives economic growth and development into the future.
Yeah. Prof. Meyer, Matthew, talking about the trickle-down effect of bad governance in so many ways that it makes it difficult for us to create more opportunities. But the point that he raises around policy uncertainty, I mean, that becomes quite the debate, right, around how you ensure that you've got policy that allows for growth, but also allows for the big debate around transformation, for instance. What do we put forward just as we get closer to a bigger dialogue as a country?
Yeah. Look, I think it's really about the three big basics. I don't think we need to really debate policies and laws. We have all of those. I think number one is about fixing the state, because society, businesses, the economy depend upon well-oiled, well-functioning public services, be it home affairs, so you don't have people queuing for days at a time to get the ID, be it an efficient police service dealing with crime and corruption, be it an efficient public healthcare service so you can prevent curable diseases, make sure workers are healthy. It's also about making sure we stimulate economic growth from the infrastructure program of government, which is about 1 trillion rand over the next 3 years. So investing in transit, efficient rail, efficient ports, key to export sectors, investing in electricity so we have affordable electricity for mining, for manufacturing, and so on, efficient roads and so forth, stimulating growth, but also about how do you really inject more capital? How do you incentivize pension funds, investment funds to invest locally as opposed to offshore? How to give more credit available to SMEs, the engine of economic growth and so forth. But also it's about helping provide a pathway to employment for young people, for people with low skills, people in rural areas and townships. And that means having public employment programs to help young people get the first job, get the skills and experience, earn a minimum wage, enter the labor market. Similarly too, how can you expand internship programs, artisanship programs, especially the kind of diesel mechanic skills that Professor Meyer talked about in the private sector? How can we avoid retrenchments? But also, we don't want everybody to be an employee. We want to also give support to people who have that entrepreneurial spirit, by making it easier for people to access credit as SMEs, link them up to potential customers, to suppliers, to access to markets, etc. We've got to get those basics right.
Yeah.
I think for us, we also have to show a sense of urgency. And of course, longer term, we've got to fix our education system because we've got to be competitive in an increasingly technologically driven world economy. And if we're going to fall behind, we're going to pay a heavy price for it.
Yeah, our list of recommendations is getting longer and longer here. But let's hear one more perhaps from our viewer. Rafiwa is calling in from Pretoria. Rafiwa, good evening.
Evening, how are you, Naledi?
I'm well. Thank you so much for calling. Talk to us.
Fantastic. Right. Yeah, we have the problem. One big problem we have is the scale. We don't have our education foundation is very bad. We're not actually producing skilled workers. We're not putting our students into a skill workshop. We're just producing intellectuals academically. Number two, we are not a production country, actually. We're not producing anything. For example, in producing China, as simple as that. We have got chemical engineers here, the toys for the kids. All these things are from China. Are we not having a factory that can produce something so that we can create jobs for everybody?
Yeah.
We're not doing that.
And that's been a debate for such a long time in the country, Rafiwa, right? How do we, manufacture and grow that particular sector in the country? One, in fact, in that second quarter, bled jobs, unfortunately. One last caller, David is in Lusikisiki. David, good evening.
Good evening, man. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you for calling.
I have a problem with the current government that we have, and I don't think they have the political will to create jobs. You'd recall, just after 1994, they introduced some sort of slavery, which was volunteering. Everybody was volunteering in the municipalities with the hope of getting jobs, and then they done away with that. And then now you also look at the issue of crime in the country. Who would want to invest in a crime where a country is fested with crime like South Africa is? And then also look at the tender system. That tender system is really not working, where you're going to find that government is paying about 18,000 per security guard, but that security guard is not getting that 18,000. It's the tenderpreneur that is getting it. That security guard is getting a lousy 6,000 rands, or if at all they get to that 6,000 rands figure. So there's quite a number of issues that government is deliberately doing, and I'm actually surprised by COSATU, because COSATU is an alliance with the ANC, and all the inputs and the advice that they have in the media. And I'm just wondering as to why don't they give that advice to their very tripartite, to the guy that they sleep in bed with, the ANC, who's actually running the country? Why can't they help these guys out? Because the corruption is actually happening in front of them. We've got people from COSATU that were leaders in COSATU who are currently now ministers. Why can't those people assist the government and say these are the things that we should be doing in order for government to be able to create jobs or create an environment that would be able to create jobs.
Yeah.
Companies would be interested to come and invest in the country. So I've got a serious problem with our government, and nothing's going to come right as long as we are still under the ANC.
Okay. David, I do want to hear from Solimulai, of course, of Stats SA, but Matthew, this is obviously something that's been put right at your feet here. Here we are talking about the quality of jobs in the country. You are Labour, not my words, David says, in bed with the ANC. What are the conversations that you have around getting these many challenges under control? He talks about the tender system, corruption, and so much more.
Well, in fact, we have that conversation with government every single day. We met with the president a few days ago on these very kind of issues. We engage with ministers every single day. And when our colleagues do well, we compliment them, encourage them to do more. And when they mess up, we equally give them a good kick in the shins. But I think we also had to focus on practical solutions. So it was us who came with the proposal in 2019 to relieve Eskom of its debt burden, because Eskom is key to turning the economy around, key to saving jobs. We managed to convince government to do exactly that. And that's partly why we've seen load shedding decreasing, not out of the woods, but progress. It is also us who put on the table the national minimum wage to help put money into workers' pockets so they could buy the goods that our economy produces, help stimulate growth, but also help improve their lives as well. It's also, for us, we've been putting in place different measures to, for example, around the Public Investment Corporation, which is the largest investment fund, not just in South Africa at 2.7 trillion, but in fact in the continent, to say when it invests, it should invest less to the benefit of politicians who shouldn't be anywhere near it, but more to supporting manufacturing sectors, agricultural sectors, export industries, things which are really going to create not just jobs, but sustainable jobs and create jobs along the entire value chain. So I think for us, it's really about number one, and in fact, all of our issues are centered on unemployment. If you can deal with unemployment, the other issues begin to address themselves. But if you don't deal with it, we're not going to make any progress. In fact, we're going to go backwards.
Yeah, the CEO of Capitec has, really brought quite the debate into the country, Solly, and that is the issue of just how we actually go about counting what the unemployment numbers look like in the country. That debate around how we measure the matters of the informal sectors, for instance. The opportunities that we have there to see improvement in, the gaps that we may have in actually seeing great jobs that are being created, unfortunately, informally.
Thank you so much, Naledi. So let's deal with this issue of unemployment rate in South Africa sitting at 10%. So if you look at those who are participating in the labor market, which we're talking about 25 million people. So in essence, you will say that we've got about 2.5 million people who are unemployed. And I think it can't be. We all know that it can't be that number. So I think we have dealt with how we are counting the unemployment rate in South Africa. We include informal sector as a sector that we are tracking. And I've already mentioned that it does contribute about 3.3 million jobs in South Africa. But I wanted to go back to the point that was raised by a caller. To say that maybe in South Africa we are not necessarily manufacturing, or we are mostly don't produce. If you can go back in 1994, Naledi, and look at the industries in terms of what was the largest industry in economy in 1994, it was manufacturing. Manufacturing was number one in South Africa. It was contributing the most in terms of GDP. Now it's sitting at number 4, about 13%. The finance and real estate business services is the largest industry in the economy that contributing the most, about 24%. So the point that I was making earlier to say, we really need to find a way of moving the economy in such a way that it will able to move the numbers, especially the job numbers. And I think the panelists have already mentioned that there's so much that we can do to push these numbers and making sure that jobs are created, and jobs when are created, I think we will be able to deal with unemployment rate for youth. We're also able to deal with the graduates that are also now seeing their numbers are increasing.
Yeah.
The NDP, Naledi, is saying that we need to reach a 6% unemployment rate by 2030. And I think that is a task that all of us will really need to make sure that we are able to push the economy to reduce the unemployment so that we can reach that 6% unemployment rate.
Yeah. I'm going to leave it there, gentlemen, because I think we've gotten some really great ideas from each and every single one of you, and we appreciate that you've been also so generous with your time. That, of course, Mr. Matthew Parks, who is COSATU's parliamentary coordinator, Solly Molai, acting DDG for Population and Social Statistics at Stats SA, and Prof. Dani Meyer, of course, who's an economist. Some WhatsApps that have come in from our viewers. Let's take a look at some of those. Team Lonzi says the government has no plan to create jobs. Even the GNU is just useless. The 700 million rand that is going to be wasted in this dialogue could have been utilised in a better way to create some jobs, but it won't happen in this anti-poor government. Hey, Team Lonzi, thank you so much for that. Another one that says, hi, please keep me anonymous. I was one of the people who got a job through Premier Nasi Spani in Gauteng. Now the MEC, Faith Mazibuko and Premier have decided to terminate our contracts abruptly without explanation as to why. They're claiming that they are giving Gauteng youth jobs, but that's not true because they just terminate contracts when they see fit. We made a huge change in the community under the Department of Social Development, but all of that work meant nothing to them. And again, we'd remember from those numbers that from Stats SA that community services bleeding quite a few jobs, so a frustrating situation. Marco says, good evening, Naledi. A dark cloud is hanging over South Africa because nothing seems to be doing well or promising. Plus, the economy is not even growing, so it's a disaster. Government needs to come up with plans to create jobs for its people because people vote for change and better lives. Thank you so much for that, Marco. Tabiso says, well, our parents are busy saying that we should study hard. The fact is that, yes, we will, and we'll be unemployed. Sure, Tabiso. Esmatu says, evening, Naledi. The Employment and Labour Minister, I suggest she must have a compulsory directives to all organisations to have and submit to her department targeted recruitment and selection plans, and each will be reimbursed a certain percentage by submitting and also a certain percentage for implementing the plan. This might ease the job crisis. Well, it's great when you hear the kind of ideas, though, that you get from South Africans on what we need to do to hold leadership accountable so that we're able to create more jobs. Well, you're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. More news on the other side. Stay with us.